What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show.
Today. It is Tuesday.
Okay, looks like there was a rebroadcast going on, but we're live. We're here. And I only had to do one day of jury duty. And so I'm back here at the microphone and ready to do the show. So it's Wednesday, January 16th, 2019, middle of the weekday, hump day, starting that long, slow glide down to Pauhana Friday and another weekend. And so I've done my civic duty. I went in and I responded to the jury summons basically, well, we got sprung middle of the day, and I'm not sure exactly what happened, but we were there in this big jury pool room, filling out paperwork, and all of a sudden, the judge. Okay, hang on a second. Over to Syria, there has been a bombing attack, which supposedly ISIS has taken credit for, that killed U.S. troops. And apparently 4 U.S. Service members were killed. It's the largest single loss of life in Syria since 2015. And I got to be very honest, this feels an awful lot like it's a false flag to basically give Trump the political cover to cancel the withdrawal. Because, as you know, a lot of people don't want the withdrawal from Syria. Trump said he was going to withdraw. Then he was hemming and hawing, and Bolton and Pompeo, of course, are pushing to stay in Syria. And so this, the timing is just too cute. First of all, ISIS would like the United States to leave. Why would they do something like this right now? Okay, and all right. Apparently, even though we're supposedly pulling troops out of Syria, more troops are actually poised to go into Syria, supposedly to facilitate the pullout. The USS Kearsarge amphibious assault ship is now in the region to provide troops and equipment to support this withdrawal here. Meanwhile, polls are showing that Americans are perfectly fine with leaving Syria and Afghanistan. They're just like really, really ready for these to be over. They've been quagmires. We've been in Afghanistan for 17 years. You know, there are kids in high school who weren't even alive yet when this war in Afghanistan started. And so basically YouGov and the Charles Koch Institute basically came out with this poll. And basically the survey is saying that Americans, a majority of Americans, are in support of an exit from Afghanistan and Syria. Now, down in Israel, their Army Chief of Staff, Gedi Eisenkot, is confirming that the Israeli military did, in fact, provide weapons to Syrian rebels operating in the Golan during the Syrian war, which is no surprise to anybody. Israel wants to hang on to the Golan. They've formally annexed it, although no other nation on earth recognizes that annexation. Israel's now trying to convince the U.S. government to recognize Israel's sovereignty over the Golan. They're already harvesting oil and gas out of the Golan. They want to sell it to Europe. They wanted to build a pipeline across Syria, and of course Assad said, no, we're not going to build a pipeline so you can sell the oil and gas you're stealing from us to Europe, and that was a big part of what this war was really all about. So there we go here. Now, interestingly enough, as you know, there's been an issue about Israel's nuclear weapons, which everybody knows they have them. Mordecai Vanunu smuggled out the pictures showing the bomb factory hidden underneath the Dimona reactor. Israel's dropped all kinds of hints that they've got the nuclear weapons. The Arabs may have the oil, but we've got the matches. But the United States official policy going back to Nixon's era is called strategic ambiguity, meaning they're not going to commit one way or the other whether Israel has nuclear weapons or not. And of course, one of the reasons that they want to do this is because it's actually against U.S. law for the U.S. government to be giving your money to any country in possession of nuclear weapon technology that refuses to sign the Non-Proliferation Treaty and allow IAEA inspections. Now, apparently there was a Freedom of Information Act lawsuit seeking at least 2 of the 4 letters signed by incoming U.S. presidents to maintain that policy of strategic ambiguity. Apparently, when a president comes on in, there's a lot of pressure from the government of Israel to basically sign these letters saying you will not confirm that we have nuclear weapons, you will go on giving us money, so forth and so on. Alrighty, over in Nablus, illegal colonialist settlers have uprooted more Palestinian farmlands, and this was in the village of Kirbat Yanun, south of the northern West Bank city of Nablus. And basically, the colonists invaded the lands with bulldozers and uprooted nearly 30 dunams of crops. And the colonists usually bulldoze and uproot the Palestinian lands before planting them in order to take control of the properties. Okay. Now, over in the Senate, they have tried for the 3rd time to pass Senate Bill 1. This is a package that would give Israel $38 billion and also outlaw the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. And for the 3rd time, it failed. Now, this bill is being promoted by the Republican Jewish Coalition, which is out there saying this is a crucial bill and urging supporters to pressure potential swing senators to vote for the bill. Now, this bill is an attack on the First Amendment. Israel doesn't like the First Amendment. They don't like freedom of speech. They don't like a world where people can look at what Israel's government is doing and criticizing the actions of the government of Israel. What they want to be able to do is come on out and say, oh, it's just anti-Semitism, it's just Jew hatred, which is nonsense. That's like saying that the only reason that people complain about the Nazis is they hate the German people. Meanwhile, over in the House, Congressman Michael T. McCall of Texas has introduced House Resolution 336, which is basically a mirror, a companion bill to Senate 1, also pushing for a $38 billion package to Israel, along with combating the boycott, divestment, and sanctions. Okay, so, all right. So, hello, RBN audience. I understand we're back on the air here. Welcome to our network affiliates just now rejoining the network. We had a little bit of a glitch in our system, and we had audio going to YouTube and a couple of other places, but sadly not to RBN. Okay, so anyway, dealing with all of this stuff here. And right now there is the beginning of an organization where people are fighting back against all of this talk about outlawing boycott, divestment, and sanctions, because it is an attack on our right to free speech. And so apparently Maryland and Virginia have formed what are called the Freedom to Boycott with the numeral 2 groups. And they're basically going public with a call to action, saying this is absolutely unacceptable. And it is. It absolutely is. All of these attacks on our Bill of Rights, especially on behalf of a foreign government, this is unacceptable. Every one of those senators who voted in favor of Senate 1 are basically Well, they're traitors to the United States. They're traitors to the founding principles of this country. I would assume, being politicians and being members of Congress, that they are familiar with the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. But apparently not, or apparently they just don't care. Israel says we must end free speech. We must end the boycott. Okay. All right, so we're good on RBN here. All righty. Now, over at the U.S. State Department, they have once again come out criticizing Hezbollah, accusing them of digging tunnels into Israel and stockpiling rockets. Well, we're not sure who is digging the tunnels. The UN isn't sure who's actually digging the tunnels. It may, in fact, be Israel, so they can scream about Hezbollah. As far as stockpiling rockets, look how often Israel attacks Lebanon. Of course, they're going to stockpile rockets. Wouldn't you? But the State Department is now calling Hezbollah unacceptable. They're unacceptable here. We, the United States of America, will bestride the globe and decide what is acceptable and not acceptable. And I think a lot of other countries are getting pretty much fed up with it. Hezbollah is the group that has prevented Israel from invading and taking over large portions of Lebanon. That's why Israel hates them. And they are a political party. There are members of Hezbollah in the government of Lebanon. They're politically active. So the U.S. wants to describe them as a terrorist group, but basically that's the definition of a terrorist group, somebody we don't like. Over at the Pentagon, officials there are concerned that John Bolton's actions could provoke a war with Iran. Gee, you think? Of course that's what he wants. John Bolton has spent decades advocating a U.S. attack on Iran. And now, as National Security Advisor, he's in a position to push the idea with President Trump. And President Trump, being very pro-Israel, is receptive to that message. So they're saying, what will that war actually look like? Well, going on in with a ground war, they're not sure they could go that far. Iran has a very well-developed military, so war on Iran might be limited to some airstrikes. Well, that didn't work out very well in either Afghanistan or Syria. I think the U.S. government has bitten off more war than it can chew. All right. Mike Pompeo is out there screaming about the fact that Iran is carrying out space launches. And that if they dare do that, if they dare put up satellites, there'll be more economic and diplomatic pressure. And Iran did attempt to launch a satellite into orbit with a 3-stage rocket. It failed, unfortunately, so I don't know why Pompeo is really upset. But Pompeo came on out and said, see, Iran can reach Europe with those missiles. Now, there is an historical basis for Pompeo to build his argument on. And that is that in the early days of the space race, both here in the United States and in Russia, the launch vehicles being used were repurposed ICBMs. The Redstone, the Atlas, the Titan II for Gemini. It wasn't until Apollo that there was a purpose-built launch vehicle, the Saturn. And that was the first launch vehicle that NASA used that wasn't originally designed to carry nuclear weapons. Same thing with Russia. Russia had an advantage in heavy lift rockets because they focused on making the rockets bigger rather than on making their nuclear warheads smaller, which is the direction the U.S. went. So they had the R-7 launch vehicle, which was just this huge monster. But just having a space launch capability doesn't necessarily mean you're a threat to anybody. And again, I'd like to remind you all, Iran has not initiated a war of conquest against another country in over 200 years, and certainly not since the 1979 Iranian Revolution. Over in Great Britain, the Theresa May's Brexit deal went to a parliamentary vote. It wasn't just defeated, it was crushed by an almost 2-to-1 margin. And immediately the Labour Party tabled a no-confidence vote, which Theresa May just barely survived, 325 to 306. But there's no question that she is in a great deal of trouble, and Nigel Farage is saying that Theresa May should resign. You know, looking at this huge defeat on the Brexit deal, losing by a margin of 230 votes, adding that Theresa May does not believe in Brexit, and she's never made any secret of the fact she's a Remainer. She's absolutely a Remainer. She wants Great Britain welded to the European Union, and she's been trying to build that into the Chequers plan, which is why it was voted down. Over in France, the Yellow Vest protests are continuing. They're heading into, I think it's week 10 now. And the French police have now been deployed with Heckler & Koch's G36 assault rifles with live ammunition. So they're going to start really shooting people. And apparently some people have been shot and seriously wounded. One is in a coma. Apparently suffered major brain damage. He was shot in the back of the head by the French police. So things are getting very, very ugly over there. Now, getting on back to my comment about the United States basically running all over the world and saying, we get to decide who's acceptable, who's unacceptable, who's legitimate, who's illegitimate. Apparently, Donald Trump is getting ready. This is a report from CNN. He's going to declare the Maduro opposition leader as the legitimate president of Venezuela and Maduro as illegitimate. We got to take a break for commercials, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And the European Union has now voted for the installation of new United States missiles in Europe. And this, of course, is a direct violation of the INF Treaty, which Trump pulled out of, and represents a dangerous escalation. Now, Russia's position right now is that if the INF collapses, which it appears to be doing right now, the U.S. is fully responsible. They're the ones who started this. And let's see. And so Moscow is blaming Washington for the collapse of this key nuclear arms control deal. And apparently Russia has offered to talk. The U.S. is simply refusing here. So on the other side, over in the Sea of Azov, NATO ships are being told that they cannot enter the Sea of Azov without the permission of Russia. And this is basically coming from Crimean authorities. And I can understand why the Russians don't want warships cruising around in that area. So they consider the entry of foreign warships into the Azov Sea as unacceptable. Okay, now let's see. Okay. The U.S. is planning an expansion into the Arctic in a bid to challenge Russia. But according to this article in Russia Insider, there's doubt whether the U.S. can really do it. Now, Washington is getting ready to send a Navy warship to sail through the Arctic in a demonstration of its growing ambitions in the far north. And the U.S. has set its sights upon the Arctic, which it sees as a new arena for a geopolitical standoff. Now, this is all predicated on this belief in human-caused global warming, which is going to open up possible waterways in the Arctic. Although right now, actually, the Arctic has added more ice this last year than in the last couple of decades. Now, Russia has really built a lot of really good icebreakers. They're well ahead of us on icebreaker technology. Some of them are nuclear powered. Right now, the United States has only one Arctic-class icebreaker. And it's a bit of a risk sending this Navy warship into the Arctic. If it gets stuck in the ice, they might have to ask the Russians to help pull them out. And that would be a huge, huge embarrassment. Over in China, they're issuing a warning to the U.S. Navy regarding Taiwan, saying that any interference in support of Taiwan's independence is basically forbidden, and that China will defend its claim to the island, quote, at any cost, end quote. Now, General Li Zhushang, a member of the Central Military Commission, made the remarks during a meeting in Beijing with Admiral John Richardson, the chief of U.S. Naval Operations. China sees Taiwan as part of its territory to be reunified, despite the two sides being ruled separately since they split in 1949 after the civil war won by Mao Zedong's communists. Taiwan has its own currency, flag, and government. It is not recognized as an independent state by the United Nations, so it's a really complicated story. But China said it will not hesitate to use force if Taipei formally declares independence, or in the case of external intervention, including by the United States, which is Taiwan's largest ally right now. And as if we didn't have enough things to keep us awake here in Hawaii, apparently the United States Air Force has deployed 3 B-2A Spirit stealth bombers to Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam right here in Hawaii, just out that window down at the bottom of the hill. I got to get out the binoculars and see if I can spot them. And this is being done to basically threaten China, to say that, yes, we're ready to come on in with long-range strike assets to counter China's increasing belligerence, which, from where I sit, China isn't the one who's being belligerent. China's not the one who's throwing weapons and soldiers all over the globe and saying this is unacceptable and that is unacceptable and this is illegitimate and, you know, we're the United States and we get to do all this stuff. Meanwhile, China has created a vast underground defense complex capable of intercepting hypersonic missiles, which can also defeat conventional, the hypersonic missiles which can defeat conventional missile defenses. Okay, so we're coming up here on another commercial break and waiting for the music. And there's no music, so I'm going to keep on talking here. And they're calling it the Underground Steel Great Wall. And it's a series of defensive facilities located deep under mountains, which are thick enough to resist enemy attacks. So along with creating the hypersonic missiles, they've created defenses to basically work against them. Okay. There's our commercial break, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And Nancy Pelosi has sent a letter to Donald Trump asking him to postpone the State of the Union speech, which is traditionally held the end of January. She says she's worried about the security of lawmakers and that it's inappropriate for Trump to get up there and have a State of the Union speech with the partial government shutdown. Steny Hoyer is already out there saying the State of the Union is off, which, to the best of my knowledge, Donald Trump hasn't made a decision. And he doesn't need to do the State of the Union speech before a joint session of Congress. If they're worried about security, he can do the speech from the Oval Office. because it's really a speech to the American people. The only thing that would be missing would be the applause coming from the gallery, which, considering how many of those people hate Donald Trump, there's not going to be a lot of that anyway. Meanwhile, as the government shutdown continues, Trump is getting ready to sign a bill or an executive order that will guarantee the back pay of all those furloughed workers. When the spending bill gets passed, they'll get checks for all the paychecks they've missed up until now, which will help them a lot. There's a lot of stories out there in the corporate media trying to basically build sympathy for the furloughed workers. Oh, those poor government workers, Donald Trump is just being so mean to them. But it really is Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi who are responsible for this deadlock. And a lot of people are now looking at the TSA, and right now, in theory, TSA officers are required to work without paychecks through the shutdown. And they're calling in sick. A lot of them have apparently gone out and gotten other jobs. And TSA spokespeople are saying everything's normal, everything's just fine, even though absenteeism has increased by 200 to 300%. And on one side, you have a lot of people saying, are they taking shortcuts with security to get people through the line? Because, as TSA don't show up, they have to close some of those gates. And that means longer lines at the gates that are working. And of course, TSA is saying they would never, ever shortchange on security. The other side of the coin is people are saying, why do we continue to subject ourselves to the TSA? In all the years they've been in operation, they have never once caught an actual terrorist. They steal a lot of stuff from luggage. That's a known problem. And every time the Department of Homeland Security runs a security check on them, about half the guns and bombs get through. There was a story just the other day where a passenger on a flight from Atlanta to Japan had packed a gun in his carry-on. TSA missed that completely. Now, the passenger wasn't planning to do anything nefarious. He got to Japan, realized the gun was in there, and said, hey, TSA missed this. Maybe TSA is a make-work program. We don't have any manufacturing left in this country, so let's put everybody to work spying on each other and groping crotches. I can imagine it'd be rather difficult for somebody in the TSA to get a different job. They go in and they talk to Human Resources, and Human Resources says, well, what did you do on your last job? And TSA guy says, well, I groped crotches. Human Resources says, I'm sorry, all of our executive positions are already filled. Now, a big story came out last week on how the FBI in 2017 launched an investigation of President Trump to consider whether the president's own actions constituted a possible threat to national security, and specifically whether he had been working on behalf of Russia against American interests. In other words, Trump is a Russian asset. He's a Russian agent. That's the claim. And the story was treated as the latest in a long series of beginning of the end disasters for the Trump presidency, although, of course, even the New York Times had to admit there was no actual evidence of guilt. Now, the question is, did the FBI launch this as revenge for the firing of James Comey? And it appears that may have been a reason, at least for its escalation. And whether this is really an appropriate use of the FBI's jurisdiction, if you will, or if the FBI just prostituted itself. One of the stories we have over at whatreallyhappened.com right now is apparently FBI agents routinely accept bribes from the media in exchange for information. They get concert tickets, discounted travel, all kinds of things like that. It is a culture of corruption. And it does need to be, we need to get an FBI director in there who's going to turn the FBI back into something that the American people can trust. Getting on back to the investigation of President Trump, though, This goes all the way back to J. Edgar Hoover, F. Kennedy, and then used the information they found to blackmail them. And Hoover saw himself as basically running the government. In fact, he called his office at the FBI the seat of the government. So you got to be careful about those intelligence agencies. They get too big for their britches, as it were, here. And of course, part of the blame for the abuse of Donald Trump goes back to Barack Obama, who enabled the FBI to spy on Donald Trump. And of course, he had help from the Hillary Clinton campaign, the Democratic National Committee, Fusion GPS, Christopher Steele. They basically cooked up this entire Russian collusion story. And apparently, Hillary actually seriously considered challenging the results of the 2016 election by saying that Donald Trump was an agent of Russia. And for whatever reason, it was called off. Now, probably last week, you've been hearing stories about Robert Mueller's upcoming final report on his Russia investigation and how it was going to show that Donald Trump was working with Russia to destabilize the United States of America. That may be a little bit of pre-spin, because on ABC's This Week, ABC News' Jonathan Karl revealed that his sources are saying that the final report by Robert Mueller's investigation is going to be anticlimactic. In other words, there's no knockout blow in there. There's probably going to be a lot of rumor and innuendo, but it's going to be rather devoid of actual facts. Despite this, Mueller is still plowing ahead. He's flinging more subpoenas, and apparently 3 new witnesses connected to Roger Stone associate Jerome Corsi, the former D.C. bureau chief for the far-right internet site InfoWars, have been subpoenaed to testify before a federal grand jury hearing testimony on the investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 election. So he's out there. He's still fishing around. And of course, Mueller is definitely angry at Corsi. Corsi refused to make a plea bargain, which involved lying about President Trump. And so Mueller's very, very unhappy about that. Okay, now, it is shaping up to be a very crowded field for the Democrats in 2020. Kirsten Gillibrand is expected to announce her bid for the 2020 presidential nomination in the very, very near future. She's forming an exploratory committee, and apparently she's going to make the announcement on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert. So she's going through all the motions. Now, do you remember all the way back during Obama's term in office, and there was this huge scandal where the IRS was deliberately targeting conservative groups and individuals and withholding their tax-exempt status and subjecting them to all kinds of regulatory harassment? Well, there's apparently a settlement, and all these groups targeted in Lois Lerner's IRS scandal are starting to receive their settlement checks. And this is all based on a $3.5 million national class action suit. So those checks are starting to go on out. What I don't understand is why people like Lois Lerner, who actually did this, are not in prison. That's a big part of what's gone wrong with our country. People who are high up, whether in politics or the world of business, they do bad things. And their companies will get fined, their organizations will get sued, but nothing bad happens to them. They just pick up their resume and they go on to their next job, causing more mischief here. Turning to the economic news, it looks like Trump's tariff war is a bust, and apparently imports are increasing and exports decreasing. And so right now, we're losing the trade war. Exports of goods from the U.S. have fallen 26.3%, and imports rose 38.5%, worsening the trade deficit, which Trump's tariffs were supposed to correct. And I understand why that's happening. And I said when he started the tariffs, it was a bad idea because the United States was not positioned to profit from a trade war or tariffs because we first had to revive our manufacturing. And we had to clean up our agriculture because nobody wants to buy that GMO stuff. So the annual trade surplus between China and the U.S. has hit a new record because China makes things. China knows how to manufacture things. We no longer know how to manufacture. People who know how to manufacture have been lured out of this country to other countries where people who know how to make things are treated with the respect they deserve. China makes some very good products. They make a lot of junk, let's be honest. They make what the importers want to buy. You know, cheap piece of something that's going to fall apart in a year, so you have to buy another one. Yeah, China will make that. They also make things, well, like the iPhone is made in China. The iPad's made in China. There's nobody in the United States who knows how to make appliances like that. That's the big problem. That's the reason why this has all failed. And along with that, Chinese investments in North America and Europe have fallen by 73% last year. Part of it's the trade war. Part of it is the U.S. scrutiny of foreign takeover deals and Beijing's restrictions on outbound investments. A big part of it, of course, the Trump administration moved to limit overseas investors' access to our high tech. And very often that's a reason why overseas investors will come in and invest in a tech company. Not because they're going to make money, they want to get access to the technology and take it back home. So it is a good idea. It's a good thing to do to protect our technology, keep it proprietary to the United States, but it does come with a cost. Meanwhile, Russia's trade with China has surged to more than $107 billion. This is a significant increase over recent years. So the United States is no longer the center of the globe's economy. All right, we have a caller on the line. Al in Canada, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. You were talking a little earlier about politicians not having to actually, be accounted for anything as far as breaking the law or anything like that. Has something changed? Were there laws written that no one's aware of?
It just seems to be an attitude that permeates our society. That in this article that I was talking about where, FBI agents are routinely being bribed for information by the media, and the article basically says, the FBI director just looks the other way. He doesn't want to anger the media. And so it's just institutionally accepted, even though it should be, grounds for firing.
Is that like, the same thing as the Mexican president allegedly getting bribed $100 million by El Chapo?
Yeah.
Same sort of thing?
I think that's a little bit bigger than concert tickets here. But it is a sign of the corruption that is seeping through the swamp. And there is one area, there actually is one law where members of Congress cannot be interfered with on their way to the Congress when Congress is in session. And a lot of members of Congress will use that law to basically evade getting tickets, traffic tickets.
Wow. Mike, it's not just your country. I mean, it's everywhere. No?
Yes.
Everywhere. It's like, how do you? I know you're not. You don't advocate violence or anything like that, but the country you live in is you have the most well-armed populace on the face of the planet, and you idly sit by and allow this stuff to happen right out in full view. I mean, they're not even hiding this stuff anymore.
No, they're not.
Right there. I mean, just like you said, Trump wants to pull out of Syria, and then boom, guess what happens? Come on. You've got to be a complete idiot not to see through that sort of thing.
Yep.
It's sad. I wish it weren't like this. And you know who? And obviously, we're the ones that suffer for this. We suffer for it. The law-abiding, tax-paying citizen suffers for these people. It's disgraceful. It is utterly disgraceful. If anybody is in France listening to this, these guys, you keep doing what you're doing and go harder. Go even harder. Hopefully the rest of the world sees it. Thanks, okay. Mike. I can hear the music.
Yeah, Al, we got to let you go. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We have a caller on the line, Gary in Arkansas. Gary, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
On for each side.
Hello, Gary?
Yes.
Yes, you're on the air.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm very, very sorry. My question is this. I've been hearing about, for the last month, of, I think it's 44,000 sealed indictments that are not being processed and haven't been processed. My question is this 44,000 people that are trying to restore this country, or is this 44,000 people that are trying to destroy this country? Nobody has ever brought that out.
Well, I have to tell you, I think all of this talk about there being 44,000 or 50,000 sealed indictments, I think it's a hoax. And I think it's out there to give people who are aware of what's going on in this country a false sense of hope that something is going to be done by somebody else. So stay at home. Don't put on that yellow vest. Don't load that rifle. The Lone Ranger is coming to save you. The cavalry is on the way. Batman is going to slap the Joker upside of the head. Yeah. I think it's basically fake news.
Quite frankly, as Commander-in-Chief, I'd like to see Trump take the Marines. I guess the Marines and Coast Guard are the ones to arrest all those people in the 10 square miles. Put a fence around it and prosecute every damn one of them. That's what I'd like to see.
Well,
that's all I got.
Yeah, I'm not in favor of the fishing net approach to this thing, but there are definitely some people who should be arrested and prosecuted. You have, starting with Hillary Clinton. I mean, even former FBI Director James Comey admitted that she committed felony violations of Title 18, and she should have been charged on that.
And all these people in the Senate and Congress have committed treason by the virtue of their recorded public vote. So, I mean, take a rocket science to figure out who's guilty. Look at their voting record. If it's unconstitutional and it's a threat to the security of the United States, put them in the slammer or worse.
Well, I think slammer will be sufficient here. We get one of them to start talking. But yeah, I'm in agreement. I mean, for the Senate to make its very first bill a giveaway to Israel and an attack on our right to freedom of speech, I think is very, very shameful. Anyway, Gary, thank you for the phone call. We're going to let you go. Okay, getting on back to the economic news. Iran and India have ditched the dollar in oil trading. India is now buying Iranian oil in the rupee so that they can basically get around what are described as bullying U.S. sanctions. There's the music. We've got to take a break for station identification, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Sam is in our control room, taking care of the phones, getting you on the air with your comments and questions. And we have a caller waiting on the line right now. Chris in Florida. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
TSA employees having a hard time making ends meet. Well, because they don't change their gloves between the freedom fondles, it's as if many passengers' ends have met already. There's your joke to start out my call, but
well, Chris, those gloves aren't for the protection of the passengers; they're for the protection of the TSA. They don't care if they give everybody on a plane a scorching case of herpes.
Right, I understand. Oh, that's awful. It'd be fun. It'd be great if they would use something like, say, ultraviolet wands or colloidal silver mist, like a silver hydrosol. I think is the best form of colloidal silver because it's the silver ions, the most active form of colloidal silver, the hydrosol or ionic silver. So they could do that quick and easy little disinfecting routine and then avoid some of that crap. But what I called about was in Florida, there's House Bill 245, HB 245. I'd like folks to write their legislators again to not pass that. That would require, or that would add the HPV vaccine, Gardasil 9, to the list of vaccines required for children to attend school in Florida. And that was, I'm just reading the write-up here. I was just notified at the Weston A. Price Foundation website. They have a little model letter that you can use. And they say that, as we already know, the HPV vaccination can carry life-threatening side effects.
Yes.
There have been more than 55,000 adverse reactions, including many deaths, reported to the Vaccine Adverse Events Reporting System. That's the government's own reporting system. And related to the HPV vaccine, and it is estimated by the government that only 1% of all reactions are ever reported. This Gardasil 9 vaccine may actually increase precancerous lesions, only targets a few of the over 100 known human papillomaviruses. I always have a hard time saying papillomaviruses. And has not been shown to last longer than 5 years. The alleged immunity it gives you. And it's never been properly studied, despite the tens of thousands of adverse reactions that have been reported to the government in connection with the HPV vaccine. And to add to the Weston A. Price Foundation's write-up is that when they've done the control group or the placebo, they don't use a placebo, they use aluminum as the control group. So they can claim, well, it's roughly equivalent to the alleged placebo group in terms of adverse effects. So that's House Bill HB 245 in Florida that folks I would ask to write their congressman and say, do not pass HB 245.
Okay, that's HB 245 in Florida, mandating HPV vaccine for kids to go to school. We actually have an article a little later in the show about a court case where a court determined that a young girl died as a result of that vaccine. And as you say, there have been a lot of deaths, things like narcolepsy reported to the vaccine injury tracking, and it's nasty stuff, but it makes money. And in the United States of America, things that make money are mandated to you. We live with a government that basically orders us to buy things we don't want and don't really need, to enrich their political contributors. That's how completely out of control the corruption has become.
Yeah, Rick Perry, when he tried to do that 10 years ago, the former governor of Texas, Rick Perry, he was found to have his own conflicts of interest. But anyhow, if folks want to learn even more about HPV and other vaccines, go to the links page at my website. That's theliberationstation.com, and there's a section, immunizations, vaccinations, autism, Asperger's syndrome, and related disorders. That's theliberationstation.com and the links page.
Okay, that's theliberationstation.com, the links page. And I've actually been over to your website a couple of times. There's a lot of really good information there.
Thank you. Thanks. It's the website for my former radio show on 5 Florida stations, and I hope to reboot it within a month. I just moved, so hopefully since I'm living now closer to the radio station studio, I'll reboot the show within about a month, and I'll let you know.
All right.
Thanks, Mike.
Please do. Please stay in touch on that. All right, Chris, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here. Yeah, the vaccines are nasty, and more information is coming on out, and the vaccine companies don't want to fix the product. They just want to silence critics. Getting on back to the economic news, it looks like Pacific Gas and Electric is really in a lot of trouble. Apparently, some of their top executives are now leaving the company. They're getting out while the getting is good because they're facing all these lawsuits from the California wildfires. And so a lot of people are starting to say, you know, what happened with the risk management? You know, there was obviously a huge failure here where they weren't looking at the aging equipment and saying, there's a possibility this line could drop. But again, going on back to the Hinckley incident, PG&E's management has really not been all that up on health and safety in general. They were just all about profits, but they're going to get driven into bankruptcy. I personally think the state ought to take it over and turn it back into being a truly public utility. Privatization has never worked out, and I think PG&E is an absolute perfect example of that here. Now, apparently, oil is plunging, and as a result, U.S. import prices tumbled in December, and so they're saying this heralds a deflationary episode, which is kind of funny because everybody else is screaming recession, recession, recession. It looks like we're heading into some hard times. It's just the reality here. Over in Europe, Bloomberg is reporting that Germany's financial regulators are urging Deutsche Bank to merge with a European rival rather than the local Commerce Bank. And the German regulators want Deutsche Bank to do this to sort of spread their risk and their potential losses around, which you have to wonder, why would anybody merge with Deutsche Bank looking at all the downside? Gold is now trading at an all-time high in 72 different currencies. People know where the value is. It's not in Bitcoin, it's not in cryptos, it's in metals, gold, silver, and so forth. All right, we have another caller on the line here. Sovereign Man, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
What's on my mind is the last caller, he was talking about House Bill, was it 425?
Yes.
345, and yeah, about the HPV mandate.
Yes.
Just want to let you and the listeners aware, and the gentleman that did call, that if you do a search for Overcoming Vaccine Mania PDF, Al Whitney has compiled a book to empower people to be able to fight the powers it should not be to mandate us to weaponize our children with their poisons.
Well,
and there is one document in there.
Yeah.
And that it's basically, you can present it to the doctor when he's saying this is mandated. You can say, well, if you will accept the liability, then we'll accept the vaccine. And guess what the doctor's going to do? He's going to sign you off on it because he's not going to accept the liability.
Okay. Yeah, well, I know that there's a lot of people out there with a lot of websites and information. Unfortunately, as we're seeing in Florida, the legislatures are just passing more and more laws to close all the loopholes. It used to be that if you had a religious objection, you could get out of vaccination. They're taking that one away. The idea is they want to force everybody to get vaccinated because it's a big moneymaker for the pharmaceutical corporations.
Yeah, but nobody has the right to impose their will upon your body or the bodies of your children. And that's what the problem is. People they're not armed or have the knowledge to legally combat these people. They just take it, we do things like, you were told, well, when you get to be 16, you got to get a driver's license. Oh, when you have to do this and you have to do that, just like little children need to be told what to do. And, when you grow up and you become mature, and you say, well, I'm responsible for the actions that I do to my children and to myself. And that's what inherently where we're at in America. We're a nation of grown-up children where we don't even think anymore.
Well, my opinion is if there is truly an inalienable right of humankind, it is a right to say what does and does not go into our bodies, our personal physical beings, whether that's GMO in our foods or food additives, and certainly these dangerous vaccines. But again, we're living with a government that is literally forcing the stuff on us, all in the name of increased corporate profit.
Yeah, I beg to defer. Well, you said corporate profits. It's a corporation acting under the guise of government, imposing their poisons on us. This is a eugenics program. And now they're going to come out with this 5G stuff. Now electronic weaponry at the street level.
Well, I think the furor over 5G is all about the fact that China owns that technology and American companies don't want to have to pay residuals to China. But getting on back to the vaccines, we know that very often, we don't know what's in those vaccines, and there have been several scandals where the vaccines turned out to contain things like sterilization drugs. World Health Organization's been caught doing that. Bill Gates is out there, openly saying vaccines should be used to control the human population. By the way, Bill Gates' own doctor went public saying that Bill Gates refused to have his children vaccinated. That's got to tell you something.
Yeah, that's kind of puts a handwriting on the wall, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. Okay, well, Sovereign Man, thank you very much for the information. We're going to let you go. Phone lines are open again. Getting on down to immigration and refugees and so forth. There are families who have been impacted by the illegal immigrant problem. Survivors of attacks, or they've lost a family member to illegal immigrant crime. They call themselves the Angel Families. And they basically did a march on Capitol Hill and Speaker Nancy Pelosi's office chanting, "Build the wall, build the wall, build the wall, build the wall." By the way, Nancy Pelosi called the police to remove those illegal immigrants who were camped out on her front lawn. Just so you know where she really is with this stuff. Okay, another phone call. Art off the grid. Aloha, Art. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
All right, just real quick before I get to what I was called in about. That was what? Angel what?
Angel Families.
Angel Families. Okay, I'm going to write that down here just so I don't forget. Families, plural?
Yes.
Okay. Now I can do a search for that and find it. Anyway, talking about these vaccines. First of all, I look at this from I guess you could say, from the viewpoint of the law. And no, that doesn't mean I'm going to be devil's advocate here. I ask people, when I teach people about the law as I understand it, and I focus on the Constitution, I always ask them, what is the most fundamental right that you have? That you can say, you tell me, what do you think is your most fundamental right? Very few people ever think of the right to choose for yourself what you want. That is your most fundamental right. That comes first before anything else. You can't choose to own a gun if you don't have the right to choose. You can't choose to anything unless you have the right to choose. It is your most fundamental right.
Yes.
Now, with that in mind, let's look at the Supreme Court in a case called Davis versus Mississippi, in which the Supreme Court ruled that your body is your personal property, cannot be taxed, cannot be controlled, cannot be manipulated, cannot be touched in any way, shape, form, or fashion without warrant under law. Anybody tries to tell you a vaccine is mandated, no, it's not. This body is my property. I choose not to pollute it, and I'm using medical. Bring up autism and these children that died from this, and how many people died from the flu vaccine, and all of that. And that is the only reason you need, and you're going to exercise your right to choose and your right to protect what is yours, your body. Now focus that on your children. You are, by law, responsible under penalty for doing or allowing anything to happen which puts that child in danger. You use that along with the research of autism and children who die from vaccines and such as that, as the only excuse you need not to pollute your child's body. Because, heaven forbid, you're responsible, right? That means you could go to prison, right? There you go, folks. You ain't got to have religion to back nothing up. All you have to do is be a little bit, don't be smarter than them, because the moment you start thinking you're smarter than they are is the moment you lose the fight. You have to be more clever, more witty.
Okay, Art, what was the name of that lawsuit again that went to the Supreme Court?
Davis versus Mississippi, and you can use their ruling for any of this, including the photograph. That's permanently attached to your body. Your fingerprints permanently attached to your body. Your blood permanently a part of you. It is your personal property. Can't be touched. Davis versus Mississippi. Take that argument and use it. That's why it's there.
All righty.
Now you're going to do some lengthy reading because it was a pretty tough case.
I can imagine that it would be. I can imagine that it would be.
Tough. It was tough. That man fought hard, but he won.
Well, good for him. Anyway, Art, thank you for the information. We're going to let you go, and we're going to start a phone call with Aiea. I hope I pronounced that correctly. I'm probably going to have to take you through the commercial break. What's on your mind?
Hey, how you doing, Mike? I'm Aiea Mustafa. I'm a blogger and investigative journalist. I've been listening to you for about 4 or 5 years now, and your information has been so good and so accurate that I only decided to call in for the first time now. But when we're dealing with regard to the vaccine issue, right, I'm a single father of 3 teenage girls, and I'm homeschooling my daughters specifically because of the vaccine issue. Now, the problem that I think that we dealing with here in America is that we keep trying to take and use the laws to fight against the same people who are using the laws and passing the laws to justify or in at least to legitimize or rather legalize these criminal acts that they're doing to us. You know, when they passing these laws saying that you have to vaccinate your kids, I remember seeing years ago that they went down to Mexico and gave that Gardasil vaccine to a bunch of female little girls, and a bunch of them started dying and getting sick and everything. And then, as you said before,
same thing in Europe.
You got Bill Gates. Yeah. I thought it was in Mexico as well, but like you said before, you got Bill Gates going all over TV doing the TED Talks and talking about how his favorite way of reducing the population is through vaccines. Then you got like the Georgia Guidestones down there where they clearly declaring how they want to reduce the population to about 500 million, the global population. You see what I'm saying? So when you got situations like that where, you know, one of the biggest harms for us as a people was what they did, as you mentioned the other day, with the Citizens United case. When the government takes corporations and starts to give them the rights as people and then start allowing those corporations to fund these people who make the laws, now we're not living in a society that's based on the protection of the well-being or the welfare of people, but more, like you said before, the corporate interests.
Yeah, we've gone fascist. Anyway, listen, we've got to take a break for commercials. Don't hang up. I'm going to come right back to you after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're talking with Aiea in California. I hope I pronounced that correctly. We're talking about vaccines. I think a big problem right now is the American people need to wake up and realize that the government is treating us as livestock.
Exactly.
They're telling us what to eat, chemicals in our food, mandatory vaccinations. We're being treated like we're farm animals. If you've ever been to like one of the big commercial farm operations, whether it's chickens or cattle or whatever, that's exactly the way they're being treated.
Exactly, just like George Orwell's Animal Farm, and similar to 1984. And it's, like the last caller spoke about how we need to use the laws and to fight or change the circumstances that we are in as a collective nation. The problem I have with that is we lost that platform now. That's like getting in a boxing ring and you're standing there with gloves on and your opponent is the referee and he got on a pair of gloves as well. These are the people who make the laws for the society. So I find it hard to use the laws to fight or at least defend ourselves from these people when the laws have been weaponized against us as a people. You know what I mean? Like, for example, there was a Supreme Court case called Shuttlesworth versus Birmingham, Alabama. I believe it was from the 60s, and it's where the Supreme Court said that no state has a right to convert a citizen's right into a privilege and attach a fee or a license to it. And if they do, that citizen may exercise his right with impunity, meaning they cannot be punished. Nevertheless, almost all of our rights in the society have been completely converted into privileges, because it blows me when I see people all over the news media saying that, like, for example, people who get out of jail, they say they're trying to get their right to vote back. A right cannot be taken from you. So if it's something that can be taken from you under any circumstances, it is therefore not a right. It is a privilege. And that right there, when we see that we living in a society where the government is actively trying to kill off the people, and you got these people who are, just by the fact that they are wealthy, have taken the position that they are superior to everybody else, and they're making these open declarations that they openly want to kill off the majority of the population. You know what I mean? Even if we just reduce it just to this nation, what kind of circumstances are we in? You know, I'm someone who, as a single father of 3 teenage girls, I'm someone who was put in prison for almost a decade for surviving a violent home invasion after police caught that burglar in our house and left him there. And then years after that, I come home, and in the spring of 2017, my daughter was raped, and the guy confessed on camera to raping my daughter. And nevertheless, the Georgia judiciary decided they didn't want to charge him, but they would charge me for punching him in the face. See what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So, like you said, we're falling into complete fascism, and everyone is running all around saying, "Oh, Donald Trump's a Nazi, Donald Trump's a Russian, Donald Trump's a Nazi." If everyone, if so against, and I'm definitely against, fascism, but if everyone is so far against this whole idea of Nazis and everything like that, how can you say you love America and that you're against Nazism when America absorbed all of the Nazis after World War II? Operation Paperclip.
Well, they got about half of them. NASA. They got about half of them.
Yeah, they didn't get all of them, but half. So but it's just like, and then, for example, like, what they talking about, all the debate about guns, like you said yesterday, I believe, when that woman just stopped the mass shooting, and she prevented it, and that saw no publicity. Nevertheless, they got these people under this MK Ultra mind control stuff running around here shooting things up and shooting people up, and they're using that as a platform to disarm everybody. I'm afraid, as a single father of teenage girls, and as a person who enlisted in the U.S. Army and was willing to give my life in defense to the Constitution and this nation, I'm afraid that to realize that we're living in a society where they are openly and actively and very rapidly seeking to disarm everybody. What kind of society are we going to live in when we cannot defend ourselves from people who will pass laws that say you will take your kids to the doctors and let us inject this poison into you. You will eat these foods that we won't even eat ourselves. You know what I mean?
Yes.
These are some terrible times for us as a society. So I'm just trying to figure out, like, I watched them murder Lavoy Finicum on live TV.
Yes.
I watched them kill that man. So that's terrifying to see that what kind of society we live in. That's terrifying. And so I'm just, my last point with the whole thing is just that, vaccines is very significant and it's very serious, but that's one aspect. That's one small means by which we are being wholly eradicated. Wasn't it the governor of what's the wrestler? The governor of Montana. Didn't he find those? Didn't him and his camera crew sneak into some of those underground cities? These elites have cities underground and everything, by which when they kick off all of this stuff, God forbid a world war happen, they're going to run into these bunkers and leave everybody out here. And what we going to do?
We're going to submit over the hatches.
Yeah, so it's just, these are some terrible times we living in, Mike. And I just wanted to say that, man. I appreciate everything you're doing, man. Thank you. Have a good
thanks
show.
An awful lot, and thank you for the phone call. We're going to let you go here. We're coming up here on another commercial break here. And when we come on back, we're going to be talking about the migrant horde. There's another one on its way. It just crossed into Guatemala. It is more than 2,000 people heading for the U.S. border. And so it looks like this is not going to stop. We're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. So we're talking about there's a new migrant caravan. It's over 2,000 people. It just crossed into Guatemala, and it's heading for the U.S. border. And as a result, the U.S. is now extending their troop deployment at the Mexican border. So there are currently about 2,300 troops assigned to the border mission. They were expected to end their mission at the end of this month, but obviously with this new migrant horde on its way, they'll have to stay down there a little bit longer. Apparently, the migrant horde has already run into a problem because one of the organizing members has been arrested on a rape charge. So they arrested 26-year-old Juan Carlos Molina. They say the man they claim is one of the main organizers and promoters of a caravan of individuals from Honduras who are seeking to reach the U.S. border to request asylum. Like I said, we're not getting the cream of the crop, as it were, from those source countries here. Now, according to a new ABC Washington Post poll, support for a border wall is soaring among swing voters. The partisan voters, the ones who always vote Republican or always vote Democrat, they're pretty much falling in line with their party's policies. Republicans want the wall. Democrats, oh no, it's racist, it's immoral, it's inhumane. But the swing voters, the ones in the middle, they're definitely coming down on the side of let's build the wall. Now, Trump is out there making the point, lots of countries have border barriers. 45 countries already have or are planning to build border barriers. Europeans have erected 800 miles of border fence in the last 4 years. So apparently the headline was misleading. It's 77 significant walls built around the world, 45 countries planning or currently building the walls. There's nothing wrong with having walls. Look at all the walls around Nancy Pelosi's place. Look at the walls around the Vatican. You know, the Pope comes on out and says, walls are bad, walls are bad. Boy, I've been to the Vatican. I've seen those walls. They are very, very impressive. Berlin Wall worked. The Great Wall of China worked for the most part. Finally, the Mongols figured out how to ride around it. But it did slow them down quite a bit. Anyway, apparently a lot of the incoming Democrat members of the new House of Representatives they're not supporting Nancy Pelosi in her steadfast refusal to fund the wall. And they're basically saying it's time to make a deal with Donald Trump and end this government shutdown. And I'm in agreement. And again, we're talking $5.6 billion for the wall. To the U.S. government, that's pocket change. They find that underneath the seat cushions over at the Pentagon. But the Democrats want those open borders because they are dependent on illegal immigrants voting Democrat in all future elections. They're trying to change the demographics of the United States. They're on the warpath against white heterosexual males or anybody who might be inclined to vote Republican. And they want to bring in all these Democratic voters who will vote Democrat because the Democrats will give them free stuff. Where are the Democrats going to get the free stuff? From you, the legal American citizen. All right, we have another caller on the line. Miles in Maine, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael. Good afternoon, and thank you for another great show.
Thank you.
That last caller from Georgia just was gut-wrenching for me. You know, a man that served his country, educated like he is, they break in his house, charge him with a crime, his daughter gets raped, they don't do anything. You know, this stuff is killing, it just kills people in their souls that are real Americans. Yes. And we see a fellow American like that man, and he can't get justice. An educated, good man, obviously a good man.
Yes.
And it's gut-wrenching, Michael, and it's stealing the American soul, not only the American dream, but our soul from us. when we can't get justice like that. And that's all I wanted to say. I don't want to stop your show because it's always so revealing. And every day it's a gift to hear your show and others on RBN. And I hope everyone will contribute.
Well, thank you very much for the kind words here. Yeah, and we see all this police abuse going on all the time, along with the civil forfeiture, where right now we have police departments all across the country are funding themselves by stealing the property of the people they're supposed to be protecting, because their budgets have been cut, the money is going to the war, and we're basically having to deal with government that is pillaging the people. You know, the taxes are very high, but that's not enough. We're going to have the police steal from the people, and for all we know, it is the government is behind all the cybercrime. It's another way to loot the populace, and that may explain why the government is doing absolutely nothing about things like ransomware. So it is a very, very dark time, and I understand the anger and frustration of people who say, we can't work within the system. And you're right, we can't. The system is just totally messed up. It's totally rigged against us. And, you know, hopefully we're going to see the whole system come crashing down in the very, very near future. And then we can restart this country on that original Constitution, on the original 13 amendments, and put back some of the common sense laws we used to have, like strict limits on campaign donations, so that wealthy individuals or corporations can't simply buy the government. We have to return the government to the control of the people, not the control of the corporate dollar. And again, these are very, very dark times. Anyway, thank you for the call, Miles. We're going to switch over to Tom in Indiana. Aloha, Tom. Welcome to the show.
Aloha.
What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Aloha. I listen to you at night on YouTube. I really like your program. I've been listening for a long time. On the Rush Limbaugh show today, there was a caller that called in and talked to Rush, and they asked him if he knew about there's a policy that is if a federal employee is off for so long, it's like 90 days or something like that, that they can give them a pink slip and get rid of a bunch of them. And Rush said, no, I don't want you to talk about that. We don't want anybody to know about that right now. And as smart as you are, I know you must know about that. And can you illuminate it a little bit for us?
I have to say I'm not aware that there is a rule where federal employees who are put on furlough by the federal government can be let go after 90 days. If somebody wants to call in with a citation, we'll certainly take the call. I do know that Donald Trump is pushing for a policy now where he can basically keep federal employees who are doing a really good job and have an easier mechanism to get rid of federal employees who are not doing a good job. One of the problems we have with our current system is once you're an employee of the federal government, it's almost impossible to get fired. And that's why you have a lot of these government employees just sit in their office and they watch online porn, and they really don't do a very good job for the people. And they're being paid a lot more than you are for the same job.
Right, right.
You know, but it is...
It's one thing I couldn't understand.
Yeah.
I couldn't understand that these people that make $100,000 a year and then lose 2 weeks of pay and they can't make their house payment or their rent. You know, I do it on about $800 a month. I don't know how they do it, you know.
Well, they have much
and they make
larger
$100,000 a year.
They have larger houses than you do. And like I said, we're seeing all these stories in the corporate media designed to make us feel sorry for the furloughed employees, like, oh, they're having to go to pawn shops, they're having to do this, I'm sorry, I don't feel sorry for the furloughed employees. You know, I mean, I think after 90 days, what's going to happen is the American people will start interfering in their own lives.
Maybe somebody can call in that knows a little bit more about that federal thing, where if they're all for such a long time, and then they can give them pink slips.
Well, I think,
anyway, that's what he tried to shush up the guy about. He didn't want him to talk about that at all.
Well, I think the issue would be if it's a federal employee who, on their own, on their decision, is gone for 90 days. I could see pink slipping them. But if they're away from work because of a government shutdown, that doesn't strike me as a very fair thing to do. But hopefully somebody has some additional information.
Thanks, Mike. Aloha.
Aloha. Thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go. Okay, up in New York, there's a federal judge who has barred the Trump administration from including a citizenship question on the 2020 census. And that decision appears to have significant implications for a related matter the Supreme Court is poised to decide here later in the spring. Now, when you consider how intrusive the census has become over the last several years, I don't think it's inappropriate at all to ask a citizenship question. Are you a citizen of this country? Or what country are you a citizen of? I don't think it's inappropriate at all. If you go back to the Constitution, the purpose of the census is to basically take account of eligible voters in a district for the purpose of redistricting for the House of Representatives. Out in California, specifically Los Angeles, the United Teachers of Los Angeles have gone on strike. They're demanding higher pay and increased staffing. And apparently, the Democrat Socialists of America are aiding and abetting the teachers' strike from heckling the scabs who are defying the union to keep the schools open, to sponsored taco lunches to show solidarity with their union brethren. So it's a mess out there. Personally, I think our tax money should go to the schools, and I think the Pentagon should have to hold a bake sale every time they want to buy a new weapon. That would be my ideal world. Getting on back to this idea of being pillaged, there's a story that apparently Chicago seized and sold nearly 50,000 cars over tickets since 2011. And basically, citations for the city road tax, where you have to have this city sticker proving that you paid the tax to drive on the road. And you have to make payments on those tickets. And if you miss, the city will seize your car. And they'll sell it to a private party. None of the money that they make from the sale is applied to the debt on the city tax stickers. And of course, if you bought the car on credit, you're still liable for those payments as well. Now, I want to talk a little bit here about this commercial that Gillette just put out. And it is certainly generating a lot of news, but not in the way Gillette would like. Basically, this commercial comes on out, and it's basically a Me Too toxic masculinity pitch. I don't know how Gillette ever thought this was going to encourage men to buy their razors. It's actually pretty revolting. And I understand that the lady who directed it has a long history of being a radical feminist. And she apparently decided she was going to use this Gillette commercial to promote that agenda. There's a 1-minute version. There's a 30-second version that doesn't even seem to be about selling razors. But it's out there trying to use Gillette's slogan, be the best a man can be, to encourage men to basically tamp down on other men's who are showing toxic masculinity. And Gillette is actually getting help from the American Psychological Association, which is out there saying it's time to teach young boys to reject traditional masculinity, that it's toxic. Masculinity can hurt boys. So they basically want men to stop being men and be something else. I'm not even sure what exactly they're talking about. This has actually prompted some other feminists to criticize Gillette over selling this pink razor aimed at women. I think it's called the Venus, and it's pink. And they're out there saying, "Oh, that's sexist," and it's. I'm getting tired of this whiny here. Over at the Daily Mail, there was an article saying, "I'm so sick of this war on masculinity, and I'm not alone." With their pathetic man-hating ad, Gillette have just cut their own throat. They certainly have. I'm never going to buy another one of their products. So specifically, this Gillette ad said that male traits like stoicism, competitiveness, achievement, eschewal of the appearance of weakness, adventure, and risk are bad and should be expunged. Let's say that the feminists succeed and they demasculinize men. Where are we going to get the armies the Pentagon wants to invade other countries? What are the soldiers going to do? Walk up to the enemy and slap him with a purse? It's pretty bad. It's pretty bad there. And again, Gillette has made a huge miscalculation here. Now, sometimes, I used to work in advertising, sometimes an ad that angers or insults people can be made to work. There was the Joe Isuzu, he's lying commercials. They worked very good. Alka-Seltzer ran a bunch of commercials that appeared to be failed commercial takes, like Mamma Mia, that's some spicy meatball. This is not going to work. This is going to turn people up. Men are going to look away before it ever gets to the pitch to buy the razors. And you have to look real hard to see the pitch to buy the razors. This Gillette ad is a political statement first. And they mention the razors in there kind of as an afterthought, as a postscript. Okay, getting into the world of computers, Alexa has stopped working for a lot of users around the world earlier today. Now, if you were not already aware of it, these voice assistants work over the internet. They send what you're saying to these massive computer centers, which interpret what you're saying and send back the appropriate response. But Amazon's virtual assistant basically was ignoring user requests for this morning. All right, we got to take a break for commercials, and we will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Comment from the What Really Happened chat room. I think the next commercial will be the men showing off their toxic masculinity in skinny jeans and asking if it makes their butt look fat. All righty, we got a caller here waiting on the line. Mark in Montana. Aloha, Mark. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Howdy, Michael. I wanted to convey my TSA story. You might find it amusing and you might find it disturbing. But about 3-4 years ago, I guess, the oil field crashed, and so I went back home to Montana, took a job in Alaska on the North Slope. And I had to fly myself back and forth to Anchorage out of Great Falls, Montana. So I just kind of vowed I'm not going to haul a bunch of luggage. If it doesn't fit on a carry-on, I'm not going to take it with me. So I went and I rummaged through my closet. I found a duffel bag and shoved my clothes, my underwear, and all that in there, and flew up. And I flew back and forth for probably about 4 months. And one day flying out, they stopped me and said, "Is this your duffel bag?" And I said, "Yeah." And they said, "Is this yours?" And he pulled out 3 .38 special rounds, and they were mine. Because I know my reloads. I'd been hauling those things in there for 6 months or 3 months, back and forth.
Yeah.
And to tell you how I don't want to call the gate rapists incompetent, but the gate rapists are incompetent. If they couldn't catch 3 .38 special rounds for months on end, that was flying back and forth. I had to go through security every time, and that was a carry-on luggage. That was not going into the belly of the beast. That went with me into the cab of the airplane.
Which means it
so
went through the
I don't
X-ray
have a lot of
machine.
faith in these guys. Yep. Yeah, and I don't know how many times. I was flying back and forth every 2 weeks for, like I said, 3-4 months probably before they brought it to my attention. The guy was nice about it. He didn't get upset. And what's weird about it is he caught me in Anchorage. So he said, "Are these you?" And I said, "Yeah, they probably are." I said, "It's probably one of my range bags." He said, "Well, you can't take them on the airplane with you. You'll have to leave them here." And I said, "That was fine." I figured I was going to go to jail or something,
Yes. Well, I'm surprised he told you to leave them there because When TSA was first starting up, one time they found my Swiss Army knife in my carry-on. They put it in an envelope, and it was handed to me when I got off the plane at the destination.
I know they took my 38 special rounds from me. I've had stuff stolen. I've had cash stolen.
Yes.
They've done nothing but steal from me and disappoint me. But then again, their government, I don't have a lot of faith in government. So I just thought I'd share that with you. And,
yeah,
if you think you're safe when you get on a plane because TSA went through your underwear, it's not true.
No, it really isn't. And of course, I'm still angry at the TSA for wrecking a laptop of mine up in Seattle. All right, well, listen, Mark, we got to let you go. Got to take a break for station identification, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And somebody just sent me an article. I'm going to go ahead and post it on whatreallyhappened.com, where apparently there is, in fact, a procedure called a reduction in force, which is government ease for layoffs, where if the bureaucrats are furloughed 30 days or more, so they're coming up right on that deadline, and there are guidelines, there are civil service protections, but apparently if the guidelines are followed, bureaucrats can be laid off. And so I'm going to go ahead and put this up at whatreallyhappened.com. Okay, getting on back to the world of computers. And I'm sure nobody's going to be surprised about this. This is over at SHTF Plan. Apparently, there's been another leak from inside Google that has revealed that Google is manipulating search results on YouTube to try and manipulate social behaviors and control minds, by which they mean controlling your point of view. Mind control isn't some weird ray gun that aims at your skull. It's simply controlling the mind by controlling what it knows. And apparently an internal discussion thread leaked to Breitbart News reveals that Google regularly intervenes in the search results on its YouTube video platform. And apparently, according to Breitbart, the existence of the blacklist, terms Google considered sensitive, was revealed in an internal Google discussion thread leaked to Breitbart News by a source inside the company who, for the obvious reasons, wishes to remain anonymous. And so some of the blacklisted terms included abortion, terms related to the Irish abortion referendum, Democratic Congresswoman Maxine Waters, and anti-gun activist and communist David Hogg. Apparently, social media is being asked by the government of India to ban the map of Pakistan, and basically claiming that it is affecting the sovereignty and integrity of India. And apparently this is an argument over India's claims to Kashmir, which has been disputed between India and Pakistan. Alrighty, story coming on out of Zero Hedge, yet another way to try and control online speech, suppress online speech. Let's call it what it is. Apparently, there are plans to start taxing social media. This is happening over in Africa, where social media is being used to basically talk about the ill behavior of the government. And so apparently, repressive governments have adopted taxes on social media usage. So people are only going to use social media when it's really important, contacting their loved ones, sending a grocery list. But it's just another way of trying to suppress the discussion here. Okay, there's been an investigation, yet another one, that reveals Roman Catholic dioceses have named more than 1,000 priests and others for sexually abusing children in just 4 months. This came out of this grand jury investigation in Pennsylvania. And apparently nearly 50 dioceses and religious orders have publicly identified child molesting priests in the wake of that Pennsylvania report, which was issued last August. 55 more have announced plans to do the same over the next few months. So I think Catholic priests ought to be allowed to get married. It's not going to make the problem go away completely, but I think it's going to tone it down a little bit. All right, getting on back to the area of vaccines. Story out of Natural News. Apparently, this idea of mass vaccination for influenza isn't working, and scientists are admitting it doesn't work. It doesn't reduce influenza-related hospital admissions at all. They're keeping track of the number of the patients who show up, and they're talking specifically about the H1N1. And there was that vaccine campaign, and it fell short of the expected results. This was a study published in the British Medical Journal, and they examined a cohort of 388,000 patients younger than 65 years old who were given the H1N1 vaccination between November 2009 and January 2010, when the transmission of pandemic influenza was spreading rapidly. And they used statistical analysis to assess the efficacy of the pandemic vaccine. And it didn't slow the rates of infection. It just really didn't work. Okay, there's this family, the Tarsal family, and they had a daughter, 21 years old, Christina Tarsal. And she got the HPV vaccine by Gardasil, and she died shortly thereafter. And the Tarsal family basically sued. They have proven the vaccine is dangerous, needs to be removed from the schedule of vaccines. They got a court ruling on this where the court agreed, yes, this vaccine killed this woman here. Out in California, they're having a fentanyl epidemic. One person is dead, a dozen others hospitalized after a mass fentanyl overdose in Chico, California. And Chico Fire Department Division Chief Jesse Alexander told Action News Now it was the most significant mass casualty incident he had ever seen. Now, fentanyl is a synthetic opiate. It's very popular with the street drug dealers. Even with all the opium flowing out of Afghanistan, the fentanyl is easier to come by because you can make it in a lab here. It is also very dangerous. And I remember some years ago when Claire and I were still living in Southern California, there was a problem with a type of fentanyl, D-alpha fentanyl, that was giving people permanent cases of Parkinson's disease. So you got to be careful about that. Meanwhile, accidental opioid deaths are now killing more Americans than car accidents. Right now, the probability of dying in a motor vehicle crash is 1 in 103. Apparently, dying from an opioid overdose is now 1 in 96. And opioid pain relievers are the most fatally abused drugs, and of course, they're entirely legal with a prescription from your doctor. Roughly 60 people die every day as a result of overdoses from opioids. That's 22,630 Americans, roughly the size of the entire population of Auburn Hills. But it makes money. And as long as it's making money, it's a good thing here. Over at Planned Parenthood, they have finally dropped the pretense that they're there about choice and have admitted that pushing abortion is their core mission. That's what they're there to do. Push abortions, get people to have abortions. They're not interested in carrying to term and adopting. They're not interested in any of that. They're pushing that abortion. And there's a new campaign. Planned Parenthood is behind these billboards being erected in Iowa that say, "I had an abortion and I am not apologizing." They're calling it abortion pride. And another billboard said, "I had an abortion and it was just health care." So this is where we are as a society. Now, I know that abortion is a very tough subject for a lot of people, and it is for me for personal reasons. I understand there are circumstances where abortion needs to be available. In the case of incest or rape, or the ultrasound is showing a seriously malformed child, I can understand that. Where I have a problem is this cavalier declaration that an unborn child just isn't a human being, and using abortion as retroactive birth control by women who just didn't want to take responsibility for their own sexuality. And that's a big, big problem. You know, women who are out there saying, I'm not that kind of girl. And then she goes out to a bar, has a few drinks. This is a little bit sick here. Apparently, there's this video of a young woman chatting with children, and it's part of a series called Kids Meet. And prior episodes have included episodes like Kids Meet a Bounty Hunter and so forth. This one was different. This episode featured the founder of Shout Your Abortion, Amelia Bono. And the episode was titled Kids Meet Someone Who's Had an Abortion. And this abortion activist basically was telling these kids that abortion is part of God's plan. And it's no different than visiting a dentist. Anyway. So they're really pushing it. And I understand there's a population problem. And there always will be, because sex is a lot more fun than dying. But I have a feeling that the coming wars are going to correct a lot of the population pressure. And we're still trying to track that Ebola outbreak in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. It's over 600 patients, some of whom have reached urban centers that are travel hubs here. Hillary Clinton is out there supporting New York Governor Andrew Cuomo to push a radical pro-abortion bill in his state that would say that it would try to legalize abortions right up to the time of birth. And Cuomo's trying to ram this pro-abortion bill through the state legislature. He says he wants to see it pass within 30 days. That is pretty scary stuff here. Now, here's a positive little story. I know I don't do enough positive stories, but we're going to do one right now. As you know, because of the partial government shutdown, the services at some of our national parks are not being done. And there's trash piling up and human feces all over the place. And apparently the Libertarian Party of Kings County decided to take measures into their own hands and prove that they don't need the government. And they basically went into the national parks and organizing trash pickup days. And I think that's a very good thing for them to have done here. All right, this being January, we look over the past year and we have a story here, the 6 dumbest and most absurd stories of 2018. And there were some doozies out there. Story number 1, is vegan a religion? And apparently there was this British vegan man who expressed concerns that the company he worked for invested money from its pension funds in non-vegan companies. Apparently he got fired and he sued, and now a British court may decide if vegans should have protection just like religions for their beliefs. And they may actually do it, because the British courts came on out and declared belief in human-caused global warming was accorded the protections of a religion. Another dumb story was the climate activists. And apparently they trespassed on private property, tampered with an oil pipeline, and they tried to excuse it in court with what's called the necessity defense. which is if you break into a house to save a child from a raging fire, that's the necessity defense and you wouldn't be prosecuted. But in this case, the climate activists broke onto private property. They used the emergency shutoff valve on the pipeline, and they claimed they did it to stop climate change. An appeals court actually agreed and said the activists could use the necessity defense. But the tactic never got tested in court. The charges were suddenly dropped against the activists. And they were actually upset. They were hoping to set a precedent for other activists to go on in and commit property damage, sabotage oil pipelines, and say, oh, it's necessary to save the planet here. Up in Scotland, and remember, Scotland gave us William Wallace. Apparently, Scottish police arrested a man for possession of a dangerous weapon in public. He was carrying a potato peeler. And apparently, being in possession of an object which had a blade or was sharply pointed carries up to 4 years in prison. Now, Great Britain is trying to crack down on a rash of knife violence. Ever since they confiscated all the guns, surprise, surprise, people of ill intent are using knives. There's been a lot of stabbings here. But this is really taking it a little bit too far when they arrest this guy for having a potato peeler in his pocket. All righty. Apparently over in Charleston, there was a teenager who was arrested for selling palmetto roses. These are handcrafted souvenir roses woven from palms. And police actually arrested the teen for his unauthorized entrepreneurship because the city of Charleston runs the Palmetto Artisan Program. And it's meant to teach entrepreneurship skills to 9 to 16-year-olds. And it is illegal for non-participating youth to sell palmetto roses within the city. Adults over the age of 18 in the city are free to craft and sell their palmetto roses. So apparently there's no way for a 17-year-old to get involved here. Apparently France, and this one isn't dumb, I sort of agree with it. France has outlawed meat terms for veggie products. In other words, if the product is made out of a soy substitute, the company making it cannot put any labeling, anything on the labels implying that it's some form of meat. And it carries a hefty fine. And apparently shoppers were being misled with terms like vegan bacon and meat-free sausage. And so France is saying, no, you can't say those anymore. All righty, truth in advertising. What can I tell you here? And this one really is extreme. This started out in California. In early last year, California lawmaker Ian Calderon introduced legislation that would make it illegal for a waiter to bring a customer a plastic straw unless specifically requested. And apparently, waitstaff who drop an unrequested straw on the table could face 6 months in jail and a $1,000 fine. So that exact bill never passed, but a different California law went into effect in just the first of this year, banning plastic straws at some restaurants. Now, the fines and jail time are a lot less. I've noticed that in some places like Starbucks, they're now selling reusable stainless steel straws. You need to be very careful of those. Some of them, the ends are not finished, and there have been reports of children literally gouging the inside of the mouth with those. So if you're going to buy one of those reusable stainless steel straws, just rub your finger over the end of it and make sure it's been smoothed off. Okay, again in California, Governor Gavin Newsom's wife, Jennifer Sibel Newsom, is going to be addressed as the first partner rather than the first lady in order to advance gender equality. Well, there's really nothing to be equal about. He's the governor and she is not. Okay. All right. We're going to take another break here for commercials, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And if you would like to help out Republic Broadcasting, and they really do need your help. We don't have any large corporations who are funding us. We're not getting money from George Soros. We're not getting money from Hillary Clinton. We survive entirely on your generosity. The postal address to send a check, money order, or if you prefer anonymity cash, is Republic Broadcasting Network, 2251 Double Creek Drive, number 302, Round Rock, Texas, 78664. The phone number where you can make a credit card or debit card donation or pledge to be a recurring subscriber is 800-724-2719, extension 1 during business hours, extension 3 at all other times. And of course, if you want to support whatreallyhappened.com, just hit that donate button over on my webpage. Okay. Apparently, an oil tanker caught fire off Hong Kong's Lamma Island. This happened last week. 1 person dead, 2 missing. And apparently, it was a very nasty fire. The people is being treated in intensive care. Back to California. California has decided they're going to regulate cow flatulence to fight global warming. Now, as we've mentioned many times before, methane is actually a more potent greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. And methane comes from flatulence. It comes from termites. It comes from deep crust microbes. But the cows are out there, and basically California enacted legislation last September to regulate greenhouse gas emissions from farms and landfills, including cow flatulence. Okay, I don't know what they're planning on doing. Jamming a cork in there? Are they going to require farms to basically put the cows in a bubble to keep the methane from going on out? Now, you need to understand something about methane. Yes, it's a potent greenhouse gas, but it spontaneously degrades in contact with water, and there's moisture in the air. It breaks down to carbon dioxide and more water vapor. I know what California is going to do. They're just going to throw another tax on the dairy industry. Say, we need the money to fight global warming. Meanwhile, apparently Britain is set for an incredibly cold weekend. There's an Arctic weather system. It's brought heavy snow, and they're saying thermometers will nosedive starting today, amid warnings that Great Britain will stay locked in the deep freezer until spring. So there's air coming down from the Arctic, pushing temperatures to freezing or below across the entire country, at least through the next 48 hours. So it's getting nasty out there. Okay. Over in Illinois, they're having problems on the roadways over last weekend, caused, again, by the snow. Cars were sliding off the highway into ditches. They loaded up 300 city trucks with salt to try and get on out there and salt the roads. I hope they bought enough salt for the winter. A lot of cities, a lot of counties, believing in human-caused global warming, they cut back their budget for salt and grit and winter preparation. St. Louis is expecting snow, totals up to 15 inches expected. And this is from the snowstorm that pounded St. Louis early Saturday. It's heading east, where it's blanketing Washington and Baltimore through the end of this weekend. St. Louis recorded 9.8 inches of snow by 7 a.m. The snow will shift later Saturday to the east coast. 4 to 6 inches predicted for Washington and 2 to 3 for Baltimore. Remember back in 2000 when they said snowfalls are a thing of the past? They were wrong. They were wrong. Over in Ohio, they've had their first major snow of the season, and they're out there basically trying to clean up. They've got the snowplows out, salt crews, and basically dealing. They got 4 to 6 inches of snow over the weekend, causing a spike in calls to police and towing companies. Apparently, no major injury crashes. Good for them here. Now, here is an article. This is coming out of Zero Hedge, and it said, let's play Follow the Climate Money. And it's basically talking about the climate crisis industry, which is out there. They're getting funding. They're getting all kinds of money. They're claiming fossil fuel emissions are causing unprecedented temperature, climate, and weather changes that pose existential threats to human civilization and our planet. The only solution, Climate Crisis Inc. insists, is to eliminate the oil, coal, and natural gas that provide 80% of the energy that makes up U.S. and global economies. Okay, what do you plan to use in its place? We got to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And we're talking about this article, Follow the Climate Money, because the climate crisis industry is big business. They've had a lot of funding come on in. They had handed a lot of money out to scientists to prove, quote unquote, human-caused global warming. And individual scientists are just as corruptible as individual lawyers or doctors or anybody else, which is why you have to rely on scientific method to figure out who's telling the truth and who is lying. So they're out there pushing this agenda to eliminate the oil, coal, and natural gas that provide 80% of the energy used by the U.S. and global economies. And failing that, Climate Crisis is demanding steadily increasing taxes on carbon-based fuels and carbon dioxide emissions. So, yeah, it's money. It's all about grabbing more money. But people are starting to push on back. I mean, over in France, the Yellow Vest protests were about a fossil fuel tax. And the biggest complaint I have about the global warming people, besides the fact that it's all a gigantic hoax to trick us out of money and obedience, is the fact that they talk glibly about getting rid of all the carbon-based fuels, and they don't come up with any workable solutions. Most of them seem to be anti-nuclear, and I understand there's problems with uranium fission reactors, but there's fusion out there. There's thorium cycle reactors out there. They're pushing solar cells, which are woefully inefficient, take up huge amounts of room. They're pushing windmills, which are unreliable when the wind isn't blowing, besides which the windmills are put up where the wind is blowing, which is usually the migration routes for birds. And so birds are getting chopped into pieces by these things. When they come up with something, a clean source of electricity in enough abundance to run our economy, then it's time to listen here. Another story, this from investors.com. The United Nations global warming fraudsters are more interested in climate cash than climate change. Apparently meeting in Bonn, Germany for yet another unneeded climate conference, attendees are now demanding $300 billion a year, more than they're already getting, to help less developed nations cope with anticipated climatic warming. Now, that $300 billion is in addition to the $100 billion the world's governments have already promised to deliver under the Paris Climate Agreement. So now the carbon Nazis are asking for a total of $400 billion per year in climate welfare for the developing world. Now, to make it worse, the proposal before the Bonn climate talks calls for the added cash to be doled out not by governments themselves or even the United Nations. The money will be channeled through non-governmental organizations, which means very little of it will get to the African people, and virtually none of it will actually address climate change. The climate's always going to change. That's the reality. That's the science. That giant fusing ball of hydrogen up there in the sky dominates climate here on Earth. Right now, it's in a period of lowered activity, which is why we're seeing a hard winter. Now, there's a little bit of good news. Over at the Department of Energy, in a collaboration with Spectral Lab, they've come up with a new solar cell with a conversion efficiency of 40.7%. That is spectacular. I remember when solar cells were first coming out, the conversion efficiency was something like 15%. 40% is really very good. It means you're going to get more electricity out of the panels. They could be a lot smaller. And I hope these things are not too expensive to manufacture, because that could definitely change the dynamics. Over at the Vatican, and we were talking about this a little bit earlier in the show about how all these abusive priests are getting on out there. Apparently, the Vatican has now deemed that McCarrick, who's a priest, that his sex acts with a 16-year-old altar boy were consensual. They're trying to get him off the hook. Now, the United States legally views a 16-year-old as a minor, but apparently church law basically says that a 16-year-old has reached the age of majority. And on that basis, they're saying that this priest, McCarrick, at St. Patrick's Cathedral, it was consensual. Okay. The monarch butterfly numbers have plummeted 86% in California. And of course, fingers are pointing all over the place. You know, what's the cause of this? Oh, it's a mite, it's cell phone towers, it's this, it's that. There was actually an article that came out in the journal Nature, and this was many years ago, that basically showed GMO pollen was harmful to benign insect species. And the example they used was the monarch butterfly. So I don't know how much GMO that they're growing out in California, but it's probably a lot. We have a little here in Hawaii. It's been a big, big, big fight. And here in Hawaii, we've noticed over the last couple of years, the monarch butterflies seem to be coming back. You know, I remember when I was a kid, you just see them all over the sky. Now, if we see one a day, that's a newsworthy event here. We had an asteroid whiz by the Earth on January 8th, and it actually flew within 1 lunar distance this year. It's a small asteroid, first observed at Mount Lemmon Survey 9 hours after it flew past us. Apparently, they didn't detect it until it was already gone. But apparently, it's got a diameter of 3.1 to 6.8 feet, which means had it hit the Earth, it probably would have exploded in the atmosphere and not caused a lot of damage. By the way, there is a lunar eclipse coming up this weekend. We'll have more information about that on Friday. It's going to be a blood moon. It's going to be perfect viewing over the mainland United States. And they're saying the period of totality is going to be over an hour. The moon is just hitting Earth's shadow right straight on. Up in Canada, there's a radio observatory, and it's called the Canadian Hydrogen Intensity Mapping Experiment. And it was originally designed to explore the early universe, cosmic background radiation, but it's been repurposed to detect what are called fast radio bursts. And these are a very puzzling phenomenon. They were first noticed back in 2007. And as the name implies, it's just a burst of radio pulses, but they don't last very long. And that's why it's so hard to track them down and try and figure out what's going on, what is causing these. Now, a lot of people out there are saying, oh, it's the extraterrestrial civilizations trying to contact us. Well, you're not going to get much communication with just a few radio dots. We all know the story of the Titanic. We've all probably seen James Cameron's movie of the Titanic. He followed that up with a documentary called Ghosts of the Abyss, where he went back down to the Titanic and did a lot of exploration with some of these submersibles that his brothers designed. And it's really worth watching and seeing if you get it. But apparently there is a new company, Ocean Gate, that is now offering commercial diving expeditions down to the Titanic, in which, if you have the money, and it is expensive, you will share a submarine with marine researchers, and you get to go on down and see the Titanic. I think that would be fun. Okay, another company, Boom Supersonic, has obtained funding of $100 million to create a commercial aircraft known as Overture that will fly supersonic. It's going to fly at more than twice the speed of sound and have a range of 5,180 miles. They've got a half-size prototype known as the XB-1 that will fly later this year. And wags are calling it the Son of Concorde. But Boom Supersonic is saying it's history's first independently developed supersonic jet and the fastest civil aircraft ever built. So good for them. I wish them luck on that one. Meanwhile, up at the International Space Station, they're discovering that microbes are mutating. The good news is they aren't mutating into anything that threatens the crew or humanity or is resistant to antibiotics. But a new study by researchers at Northwestern University found that microbes on board the ISS mutated different genes than their Earthbound counterparts, either as part of natural selection or responding to the space environment. There's been a lot of speculation about the effects of radiation, microgravity, the lack of ventilation, and how that might affect living organisms, including bacteria. So life finds a way here. NASA has apparently started a dialogue with Roscosmos, which is Russia's space program, to further improve and tailor its tried and true rocket ship Soyuz for flights to the moon. And Roscosmos has discovered the Americans are proposing future versions of the Union will be able to fly to the moon and back and function as another spare cosmic transport system. And Rogozin, it's a bad translation, also announced NASA wants Russia to continue to be their rides using the existing Soyuz ships to the International Space Station and back to Earth. Now, the United States is planning to create a permanent station with astronauts in orbit around the moon. And it wants to build a permanent lunar base, although it looks like China may get there first. So, interesting things happening over there at NASA. China has scored a first in space. As you know, their little rover that's on the far side of the moon took some plants with it. And when the rover rolled on out onto the lunar surface, they dropped water on them. And the plants have germinated and are starting to grow. And it's basically a test of concept if these particular plants will survive in the lowered gravity lunar environment as a prelude to being able to create food for the people on the lunar base. That's going to be a big situation. You know, trying to just constantly supply a lunar base from Earth will be hideously costly. I mean, they're already doing that on the ISS, and it's expensive. So they're looking at basically growing their own food. Okay, apparently, this is just breaking. Down in Atlanta, there's this gentleman, Hasher Jalal Tahab of Cumming, was arrested in Gwinnett County. Apparently, it's a terrorist case And he's accused of plotting to destroy the White House and other Washington, D.C. government buildings. And authorities are saying all the threats have been neutralized, and the suspect was believed to be acting alone. So these are very, very tense times, and good for the Secret Service. What can I tell you? All righty. Apparently, if you're my age, you'll probably remember the Motorola Razr phone. It was a flip phone. It was intentionally designed to look like the communicators from Star Trek. And apparently the Razr is coming back. It's going to cost about $1,500. And this one is going to come with a folding screen, which I believe on Monday I mentioned those aren't working out all that well. There was a story here where apparently a young boy had his cell phone confiscated by his father, and the boy called 911 on him and said, you know, his father had stolen his $800 cell phone. It doesn't belong to him. It's a little bit out there here. Ooh, okay. This just came on in. Apparently, the cotton sprout growing on the moon has already died. Bad news there. Bad news there. Okay. All right. Let's see. All right. Apparently, the CNN and the Secret Service are rejecting Nancy Pelosi's concerns over security for the State of the Union speech. They're saying, no, everybody's there. We're going to be taking care of the place as well as we ever do. I think basically Nancy Pelosi is just trying, again, to make sure that Donald Trump isn't able to get up there on TV and present his side of the story about the wall, about the government shutdown. And so, yeah, nice try, Nancy. Definitely a nice try. Let's see. Oh, let's see. Somebody just wrote on in. The solution to the cow flatulence problem is give the cows gas X. Actually, I think that would make it worse rather than better. That really is kind of silly out there. Oh, we have a caller on the line. Unfortunately, we're coming up on a commercial break, but Dustin, I'm going to take your call during the last segment of our program after we come back from these words from our sponsors. So stay tuned, and we'll be back to finish up the show right about now. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, last segment of our program today, and we're going to take a phone call from Dustin in New Jersey. Dustin, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
How you doing, Mike?
Doing fine.
Mike, cow flatulence, gas? Assad did it and Putin helped. What a joke, Mike. I mean, this whole thing, Nancy Pelosi saying, oh, security concerns, and all, come on now. You know, if they don't show up, Donald Trump should just fill in the Democratic seats with people who voted for him. You know, and make it look like a full house. You know, it'd be like, business as usual here. You know, and they'll, the Democrats or whatever, they don't want to show up. They'll be left out, outside or something. You know, I mean, what a he should not. The State of the Union should go through. I mean, because if he takes a step back, they'll take 10 steps forward. You can't. These people are never going to make a deal like with the wall or nothing. That's their ideology. So you can't back down. You know.
Well,
look at what in Brexit.
You know, Trump has
Brexit's
already
the
backed
same way.
off.
They're not backing down, Mike.
Trump has already backed off declaring a national emergency, and he says he wants to go back to trying to work with Congress, who does not want to work with him. And unfortunately, Trump is proving himself to be a rather weak leader. He's easily manipulated. He is susceptible to flattery, according to reports I've heard. And if he backs down on the State of the Union, he's destroying his own presidency. I think he's a one-term president.
Oh yeah, Mike. This is an ideology around the world. You know, like what Britain's going on in France. I mean, they're not. They want a second referendum in Britain with the Brexit because their ideology means full steam ahead.
It's only the Remainers who want the second referendum. The British people already voted, and they're saying we've already voted. Let's get on with it.
Hey, Mike. I don't know if you watched the Duran on YouTube, but they had the last one was about we're talking about them calling Trump like a Russian agent, which is like it's laughable. But do you realize how embarrassing these people made this country? Like the deep state establishment, the Democrats, they like the ones that are calling him all these things, the media. They have embarrassed this country. They're the threat. They have made this country look like a joke to where other countries are looking like at our country and saying, who's running this country? Like they're going to do business with the Russians at this point, with the buying weapons or trade, like with India and stuff. Everybody's moving away from the UN, and this is like a joke now. It's sad. They don't realize like they embarrass this country. Like
or they simply don't care. But yeah, I mean, the United States is an empire in decline. That's pretty obvious to everybody who's objectively studying the situation. They're holding the economy together with spit and baling wire. Our weapons are overpriced and ineffective. We're stuck in these wars all over the globe, and we're not doing very well in Afghanistan. We're certainly not doing well in Syria. And anyway, there's the music. And Dustin, I'm going to have to let you go. And I apologize to our other caller who was not able to get on the air today. But it's time for me to get on out of here and get something useful done with the rest of the day. So please stay tuned for John Stedmiller. I'm sure he's got lots and lots of interesting things to share with you. Take what you learn here and at the website, share it with other people. Use email or text message or paper mail or face-to-face conversation. Forget about social media. It is totally co-opted. Donate to RBN. Please donate to whatreallyhappened.com. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.